All right, we are going live. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Chuck Holton here. I'm coming to you from my studio in Panama. Thank you for joining us today. Do me a favor. Got a bunch of people already online. Go to the chat and post where you're watching from. I love to see all the different places. There's somebody from New Mexico, Cleveland, Ohio, Oregon, Tel Aviv, Spokane, Washington. The analytics show that about 75% of or about 70% of our market is in the United States, and the rest is overseas. Brazil, there's somebody from Manitoba, Canada, Maine, wow, Quebec, all over the place. Detroit, it's going by so fast now, I can't even read it. Okay, so thank you for doing that. That tells the algorithm more people need to be watching this. And we got a lot to talk about today. There's some weird stuff going on. So the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, just announced that basically all U.S. military generals, general officers, now that could be 01 and above, G01 and above, I guess, general officers, that'd be generals, brigadier generals, major generals, lieutenant generals, and generals, as well as admirals and that sort of thing. Over 800 of them. Basically, the entire top brass of the U.S. military has got to stop what they're doing, get on a plane, and make their way over to Quantico, Virginia next week for a meeting. And I wanted to call it a secret meeting, but it's obviously not a secret meeting because we know about it, but the details of the meeting are secret. We are not being told exactly why Pete Hegseth declared this to be so important. And this is the first time this has happened, I think, ever, at least in my lifetime, for all of the top brass to get called in. And so I'm going to go through some possibilities. Everything that we're going to talk about in terms of what this meeting might be about is speculation at this point, because again, they're not releasing any information about why. Now, it'll probably come out later. I don't think you could get 800 people together plus all of their entourages, because you're not just talking about, you know, general officer buying an economy class ticket from Guam and flying over. But no, these people all have their own private aircraft. They have their own entourage of assistants and, you know, majors and colonels and stuff who get them their coffee and wipe their behind when they need it. So the total number of people that are going to be at this meeting are probably in the close to 4,000 or 5,000, could be. And so I don't think it's likely that they're going to be able to keep it secret for long. I just, I don't, things tend to leak out. And they may announce what it's about once they've done it. And I've seen some people say, oh, this is a really bad time to do this because, I mean, it's not like there's any problems in the world. Thank you, MM, very kind of you. Not like there's any problems in the world going on right now in like, oh, China, Taiwan, Ukraine, Russia, NATO countries all across the globe, Somalia, Sudan, Israel, Yemen, Iran. You know, it's not like there's any problems anywhere that, you know, our top brass need to be actually paying attention to. So, however, that might actually be why he's bringing them together, because they've got to pay better attention. And there may be something very big that's about to happen. We're going to talk about what that might be. We're going to talk about some of the possibilities, what the mainstream media is saying about all this. And so let's just start with the, before we do that, you know, it's obvious that there is a lot of uncertainty in the world these days. And when that happens, markets get volatile. The dollar is bleeding like like the blonde girl in a horror movie that just has to go out into the woods and check that strange noise that she heard at midnight. And when that happens, you don't necessarily want to have all of your money in volatile assets like stocks and things like that, especially if you are somewhere close to retirement. Now, you can bet that a lot of people have in the United States have been watching their retirement accounts very closely over the last year. Now, I want to talk about what Preserve Gold has to offer here. I'm working with my sponsor, Preserve Gold, because they make it ridiculously easy to protect your retirement with a precious metals IRA. Now, if you don't know how that works, here's what you need to do. You roll over your old 401k or IRA into a self-directed account that actually holds physical gold and silver, not paper IOUs, but real metal that's stored in IRS-approved vaults. You still get the tax benefits of an IRA, but instead of betting your future on, politicians and algorithms, you're backed by the one asset that's been real money for 5,000 years. The setup is quick and the fees are low. And Preserve Gold even offers zero-fee buybacks if you ever want to cash out. So don't wait for the next crazy moment on Wall Street to erase your savings. Take control. Text the word Chuck to 50505 right now for more information and get Preserve Gold working for you. Because let's be honest, Social Security is not going to save you. So you can go to preservegold.com/hotzone or text Chuck to 50505 and actually get somebody who knows what they're talking about who can help you with your retirement account. And shoot, gold has gone up 10% almost in the last 30 days. I've been saying this for a while, that gold is going to hit 4,000, probably 5,000 in the next couple of years. And it's up 40% this year. That's incredible for such a stable asset. And that just shows that there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So let's talk about that uncertainty. So we'll start with what's going on over in Europe. We've had a lot of craziness happening over there. For one thing, there is, we got to make that bigger. Oh no, sorry, that's the wrong one. How did that all of a sudden get smaller? That shouldn't have got smaller. I had that set right. This is a map of Denmark, and all of the red dots here are places where there have been drone activity spotted just over Denmark in the last few days. Now, we're not talking about the kind of drones that you fly, like I've got here on my desk someplace. We're not talking about DJI drones for surveillance drones or anything like that. We're talking about drones that are about the size of a Cessna. I mean, big drones. Some of them might be a little smaller than that, but we're talking about $10,000 to $100,000 drones, or even more expensive than that. So it's probably not a hobbyist, is what I'm saying. And it wouldn't be a bunch of hobbyists all at once flying over sensitive military sites in the Netherlands. And so that's not the only place we've seen incursions like that. We've also seen drone activity, as you know, into Poland. We had one day where 19 Russian drones flew into Poland. These were suicide drones. They didn't have warheads on them. And many of them were shot down. Some of them just fell in open areas. And so nobody was injured, but there was some damage. But it doesn't matter if these things if they have explosives loaded in the nose cone. The very fact that Russia is flying drones unsolicited over NATO countries is very concerning. Then we had last week, earlier this week, I guess, Russian fighter jets flying right over. Well, we can go look, actually, if I go to my map. right over important sites in the Baltics. So we'll go over here. Let's see, get this set up and then I can pull it up for you. All right, here we go. Let's see. All right, there's my map. Okay, so what we're looking at here is way bigger than it should be. Let's make that a little easier to see. There we go. Okay, so what we're looking at here is there were Russian jets that flew right by Tallinn in Estonia. They also had a separate incident where Russian jets flew over an oil rig that's right out here in the Red Sea. And we're not talking about, oh, they flew over at 30,000 feet. No, they flew over at like 300 feet. And that's inappropriate, to say the least. Right? I mean, that's quite inappropriate for Russia to be doing that. They were chased off by some Italian F-35s, and then they flew, those jets flew for 12 minutes through NATO territory and flew down here to Kaliningrad, right here. This is part of Russia that's surrounded by NATO. And as far as I know, those planes are still there in Kaliningrad to this day. So what Russia was doing there, maybe they were trying to hide some of their jets, because they keep getting their jets taken out on the ground at airfields inside Russia by Ukrainian drones. So that's not all. Then Russia, over the 2 days ago, flew their jets into, not into U.S. airspace, but if you look here, this red area that's surrounding Alaska is called the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, or the ADIZ. And that's considered international waters, but if an aircraft flies into that zone, they have to identify themselves to the United States so that we can determine that they're not hostile. Well, Russia did not do that. Russia flew a Tupolev bomber, and let's see here if I have a bomber. I thought I had the video of that. Maybe I don't. But they flew a Russian bomber accompanied by a couple of fighter jets into that area. Really bad idea. The United States was forced to scramble fighter jets to go up there because these Russian jets were not squawking the right frequency. They were not identifying themselves as they're supposed to do. And so because of that, it really caused some, well, let's just say heartache. Caused some consternation from with the United States. And that was by design, by the way. That was supposed to happen. As a matter of fact, here's the video of it. I'll turn that down a little bit because you really just don't need to hear engines roaring. But this is the Russian fighter jets. This is footage that the Ministry of Defense of Russia put out of those are flanker jets, I believe. And a Tupolev, that's a nuclear capable bomber that's flying very close to the Alaskan coast. Now, they did not cross into the U.S. territory, but they got very close, much closer than they should have, especially without advising us first. um, that you realize how close that is. I mean, when you look at Alaska and Russia, at the nearest point, it's only like 2.5 miles across. So there's not a lot of wiggle room there. If you were to look at the nearest settlements between the closest Russian settlement and the closest Alaskan one, you're still only talking about maybe 50 miles, maybe less. So theoretically, Russia could set up on their own territory and shoot artillery at the United States and hit the United States. Now, that would be a dumb thing to do. They're not going to do that. But there's just all of that to say that they are seeing what they can do to provoke the United States and to provoke NATO. I think there's no question about that. Those provocations are probably meant less as provocations by Russia and more to gauge the amount of time it takes for NATO to respond. They want to know that they're gathering intelligence, and they realize, they're probably not going to shoot us down, and so we're just going to play cat and mouse with them a little bit and let them know that we're not afraid to enter their territory. So they're trying to send a message here. Now, what we can we could do a whole live about why Russia is doing this at this time. But the quick answer is that Russia is really starting to fail, not only on the battlefield, but mostly in their own country, in their economy. Ukraine's summer offensive, rather than taking place on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine, has been taking place in the skies over Russia and in the waters around Russian naval bases. Ukraine has been sending dozens, if not hundreds, of drones into Russia every single day, striking critical infrastructure, mostly things that have to do with their petroleum infrastructure. And that's how Russia pays its bills. Russia is on a wartime economy. They cannot afford for this war to end because if they do, their whole economy is going to just collapse. So they need the war to keep going. And they are really starting to feel it with these long-range strikes from Ukraine. Now, Russia blames the United States and NATO for these strikes. They say that these drones, these missiles, whatever Ukraine is firing at them, are being supplied to Ukraine by the United States and NATO. And therefore, the war is really with NATO and not just with Ukraine. And if you don't believe me on that, listen to what Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, said at the United Nations. And then I also tacked on to the end of this short quote of his, the response to that by Mark Rutte, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations, which I thought was kind of humorous. So take a listen to what Lavrov had to say.
Another clear example is the crisis in Ukraine provoked by the West, through which NATO and the European Union have already declared, a real war on my country and are directly participating in it.
Lavrov, he is foreign minister of Russia, I think, since the birth of Jesus Christ. And since then, anything useful came out of his mouth. So let's not pay too much attention to Mr. Lavrov.
So, yeah, he's been around since the birth of Jesus Christ, and he's never really had anything good to say. But Lavrov there is saying, we are already at war with NATO. NATO is helping Ukraine, and we consider that to be an act of war against our country. So as Russia sees its funding sources drying up, or more accurately blowing up, going through the roof, as Ukraine continues to bomb them. They just bombed a large fuel train that was coming out of Belarus When you're reliant on Belarus to get your gasoline and you're Russia, you know there's problems in Russia because Russia has so much more gas than Belarus does. But Belarus sent a train full of fuel tankers into Russia to try to help alleviate the gas shortage that's taking place across Russia. And Ukraine saw it and blew that thing to kingdom come. So it didn't go well for Russia. And look, things are getting more and more tense throughout that region. Poland just put out a memo to all of its citizens that happen to be in Belarus for whatever reason to get out. Get out any way you can as fast as possible because things may be coming to a head sooner rather than later. Now, President Trump has been apprised of the situation as he met with Vladimir Zelensky at the UN, a couple days ago. Zelensky apparently advised him of a new offensive that the Ukrainian military has planned for Russia. And as I said, these offensives probably will not be just on the ground with conventional forces. They may include conventional forces, but they are very likely to be mostly comprised of drones and missiles. And Russia says that Ukraine is getting these missiles from the United States or from Europe, but that's not actually true for the most part. Ukraine has started to build their own missiles. They're Flamingo missiles. They have a very long range and very high payload, and they have not been using them much. They've used a couple of them, I believe, in Crimea, and they left a lot of damage behind, big craters. But they say they're making 7 of these every day, and so I think you can expect that, I've been saying this for a while, you can expect that Ukraine is planning a huge attack against mainland Russia with missiles and drones, probably in their hundreds in the coming days. Maybe next week, maybe next month. It takes time to plan these things and coordinate them, get everything in place. But it is almost certain that is in the works. President Trump said as much, and you just notice how President Trump's tune has changed to all of a sudden, Putin just really needs to stop this war. I mean, but he's been so pro-Putin, pro-Russia up until about 15 minutes ago, and now all of a sudden he's very pro-Ukraine and Russia's bad, and they need to stop fighting and everything. And I said the other day that that's likely because President Trump has started to see the writing on the wall and sees that Russia is going to get hit very badly and likely lose the war in the coming year or so. And losing the war for Russia means a collapse inside Russia, maybe even civil war. I mean, it's going to be crazy if that happens. And President Trump wants to be on the right side of history here, so he's now all of a sudden just really great. He went from telling Vladimir Zelensky, you've got no cards to play, to now he's going, Russia has got no cards to play. So listen what President Trump had to say.
But I'm very disappointed in Putin. And he's been fighting hard, he's been fighting long, and they lost millions, they lost like 1 million soldiers. And with all of the heavy bombardment over the last 2 weeks, they've gained almost no land. Think of that. They've gained almost no land. And I'm not going to ever call anybody a paper tiger, but Russia spent millions and millions of dollars in bombs, missiles, ammunition, and lives, their lives, and they've gained virtually no land. I think it's time to stop. I really do.
So President Trump there is, making it very clear, and he's starting to, if you notice, use the statistics that the rest of the world has been using, where before he was kind of making up his own statistics or quoting stuff that was actually coming from Russian propaganda. He's stopped using the Russian propaganda now, And you could say, well, now he's using NATO propaganda, but a lot of the numbers that he's quoting there, like 1 million casualties and that sort of thing, are not coming direct from Ukrainian propaganda. They are from third-party intel sources like from the UK and Bellingcat and places like that. So just an abrupt turnaround by President Trump. Apparently, in that meeting he had with Vladimir Zelensky, Zelensky asked for Trump to sell them some Tomahawk missiles. These have like a 1,600 kilometer range and could reach deep, deep into Russia. And President Trump was not averse to doing that. So he didn't commit to selling any to Ukraine, but he didn't say he wouldn't either. And that's a big change from before. So he's, I think, number one, very upset with Vladimir Putin because he thought they were friends and he thought he could talk him into slowing stuff down. But that just shows that President Trump did not have a clear understanding of what is at stake in this war and what the true reasons are behind Russia attacking Ukraine. It had nothing to do with Nazis, had nothing to do with biolabs, had nothing to do with, Ukraine attacking Russians. I was in the Donbass region before the war started. Ukraine was not attacking any Russians in there. I spoke to a lot of Russian speakers in there, and they all said, yeah, we speak Russian, but we want to be Ukrainian. Except for one old drunk guy who was like, oh, I want to be part of Russia. And so, okay, so there was one at least. But the bottom line is the real reason that Vladimir Putin decided to attack Ukraine when he did had more to do with the power grid inside Russia and with the competition of the oil and natural gas that had been recently discovered in the Donbass region of Ukraine. As far as the power grid goes, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, during the Soviet Union built a bunch of nuclear power plants inside Ukraine, and they were all plugged into the Soviet network. So even after Ukraine declared independence, Ukraine was still providing a lot of electricity to Russia. And the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was the largest of all of the nuclear power plants that was doing so. But Ukraine did not like the idea of providing power to Russia, especially to like Sevastopol and to occupied areas of Ukraine that Russia was annexing. And so they hatched a plan to change the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant from the Russian standard of the Russian network over to the European network. I mean, you might not believe that, but I got that directly from the head of the Ukrainian Energy Agency. I rode in a car with him for several hours, and we talked at length about this, and he explained it all. He said when they decided that they wanted to move over to the European network, and that's very different. It's not as easy as just flipping a switch or changing a connection. It's kind of like the difference between changing gauges on a railway. You kind of have to replace a lot of stuff to make that happen. And when they announced they were going to do it, Russia said, don't do that. Russia got power from Zaporizhzhia to the tune of about 4 million people in Russia were getting their power from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And Ukraine said, no, we're going to do it. And so they made preparations to make the switch over. And they made the changeover on the morning of February 22nd, 2022. Or February, whatever the day the war started. 4 hours later, Russia invaded. And the very first mission, the very first objective they went for was the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They took it over and they still hold it to this day. Now, it was run by Ukrainian engineers, and those guys didn't want to play ball with Russia, obviously, so they were sort of slow walking things, and Russia was threatening them, and they mostly all escaped. And so but they didn't escape before they just shut everything down at Zaporizhzhia. And so it's been shut down for a couple of years now. And so it's not providing any power for anybody at this point. If you think the United States power grid is fragile, you should see Russia's power grid. It's even more fragile. And so Russia has been struggling to make up that 4 million people, loss of electricity that they lost from Zaporizhzhia. And their plan has been to get Zaporizhzhia back online and plug it back into the Russian power grid. They had to start from scratch, though, because they had to train up some nuclear engineers who could run Zaporizhzhia. They didn't have enough talent that knew how to do that. And so it's taken them a couple of years to get that together. They're actually getting pretty close to turning Zaporizhzhia back on and connecting it back to the Russian power grid. Now, it won't be very difficult if Ukraine wants to cut the power lines that are feeding it into the power grid. But I don't know if they'll do that because Russia did that. Russia was bombing the power grid around Zaporizhzhia. And for a time, Zaporizhzhia had to run on emergency backup generators to keep their nuclear cores cool so they didn't, have a meltdown like Chernobyl. But I don't think Ukraine would actually go that far. But suffice it to say, one of the reasons why Russia wants to annex all of Zaporizhzhia Oblast is because they want to insulate themselves from those kinds of attacks from Ukraine. Okay, so that's one reason. The second reason Russia invaded is because Ukraine, since 2013, had discovered about 39 trillion cubic meters of natural gas in the Donbass region. There are already pipelines going through there that went to Europe. And so theoretically, if Ukraine could develop those gas fields, they could become a major competitor to Russia for the European market. And so Russia was like, no, we can't have that. We got to take that over. And the area that Russia controls right now almost exactly corresponds to the area where that natural gas was discovered. However, the fact that Russia took it over has made this problem of Russia losing business to Western Europe a self-fulfilling prophecy. They are not selling much gas at all to Western Europe anymore. President Trump, as you heard in that clip, is pushing the Western European countries to stop buying altogether. Don't take any more. And that is a challenge because they've gotten rid of much of their other power generation capabilities and thought they were going to be buying it through Nord Stream 2 from Russia. Now that's not a thing. And that, especially if there's an extra cold winter coming up or something like that, is going to cause some major hardship for the Europeans. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Nevertheless, Russia is not getting most of the money from the business that they were doing with Western Europe up until this point. Okay, so folks, we're going to talk more here about this meeting at Quantico and what it means, what it might mean, what it probably doesn't mean. And, we're going to talk about some of the speculation that's going on there in just a second. But first, I just want to tell you that if you like this content, please make sure that you're subscribed here on YouTube. And do me a favor, go over to chuckholton.com and become a subscriber over there. You can subscribe for free, or you can become a supporter for $9 a month. And that is a great way that we are able to continue doing this, pay all my staff without having to worry about the ups and downs of the YouTube algorithm, because believe me, the variability of income on YouTube is pretty high. So we're trying to diversify and push people over there, and we're offering a lot of extra content. We're going to have some merch coming out pretty soon, t-shirts and hats and things like that. You guys have been begging for that stuff, so okay, we'll put it out. And we're putting out a lot of extra content, putting a lot of work into chuckholton.com over on Locals for you to. So Locals is like Patreon, where you can become a supporter. And that means a lot when people do that. So do me a favor, go to chuckholton.com if you want to keep us on the air, and we appreciate that. We're going to be doing we're going to be raising funds over there pretty soon for a sweet little girl I met yesterday, and I'm going to have to tell you that story later. But oh my goodness, what an incredible little girl, and her need is huge. I mean, we're talking life or death. So I'll be talking about that before too long. Okay, so let's talk about this meeting of generals in Quantico. And I do want to remind you to go hit the like button, folks. We've got almost 6,000 people watching. And so make sure you hit the like button. It tells YouTube more people need to be shown this content. So I know that it's easy to forget that. You get so enthralled with the sound of my sexy voice, and then you forget to hit the like button. But booping the little boop, the button thing there would be extremely helpful. So please do that. All right, so let's talk about this this thing now. This meeting is pretty abrupt and unusual. As I said, it's the only time in my lifetime this has happened. Probably the only time in history that all of the top brass has gotten together in one place for the U.S. military. The Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell confirmed that Hegseth will be addressing the senior military leaders, but would not provide specifics about what he was going to say. That's caused some confusion and concern among the media and defense and military circles, given the scale and the secrecy of this, and then the timing of it with all the craziness going on in Europe. And I mean, it's bigger than what I've told you. Actually, there's right now, just saw on X this morning, there are open source intelligence people who are tracking aircraft all over the world, especially military aircraft. And right now, as we speak, there are 5 military, 5 U.S. Air Force refueling zones that have been established over the Mediterranean and Europe. 5 of them. Now that's really out of the ordinary. And what I mean is they've got multiple, each one of those zones has multiple refueling tankers doing circles in the air up there. And it looks like, they're getting ready for a major operation over the Mediterranean. We don't know exactly what that is, but, there's been a lot of people hinting, even Benjamin Netanyahu, who gave a speech to the UN this morning, which was, it was fine. It was too long, far too long. And he said exactly what he needs to be saying, which is return the hostages now. That's all he needed to say. Just stand up there and say, return the hostages now, and then leave. That would have caused a lot more memorable, response with people than the hour-and-a-half speech that he gave. But one of the things he said in this speech was, there are changes coming and that will be announced soon that will be our response to European countries recognizing the state of Palestine. So even Netanyahu is hinting at things. President Trump has been hinting at things. Vladimir Putin and the other Russian oligarchs have been definitely hinting at things, hinting very clearly, that we have nuclear weapons. Yeah, we know you have nuclear weapons. We know you're not going to use them. Unless you just want your own country to turn into a sea of molten glass, probably wouldn't be a good idea to be rolling out your nukes right now. But all of that uncertainty just adds to the kind of what is going on here with this meeting. It follows a string of changes and firings that have been instituted by Hegseth in the military, to say the least. I mean, since Hegseth took over, he has dramatically just renovated the U.S. military more in the image of President Trump. And that's a very good thing. I mean, I'm so happy with the things that Hegseth has done to the U.S. military, saying, look, this is not going to be a grand social experiment anymore. We're not going to do this politically correct garbage. This is going to be a meritocracy and a meritocracy only. We're not going to be giving guns to mentally ill people who we know have a suicide rate that's 5 times the norm. We know have a rate of abuse and violence that is 5 times the norm. We're not going to pretend that's not a thing anymore. We're going to just make it go away. So some observers, and we're going to go through the different hypotheses that I came up with for this meeting. And again, all of this is speculation. We don't have any hard facts on this, so we're just going to hash it out together and try to figure out what it might be. Number one, Hegseth might be about to unveil or launch a new national defense strategy or Department of War strategy. And he wants to get everybody together to explain to them, this is the direction we're going to be going from now on. Boom. This is our new overall strategic focus. That's probably the most likely thing that is going to happen. It's almost never as exciting as you think it is, or might even want it to be, when you hear news like this. A lot of times it's just there's so much just speculation that goes on, that is conspiracy theories and all this crazy tinfoil hat stuff, that it actually turns out to be something much simpler and more boring. So the simplest, most boring answer is that Hegseth wants to hash out a new national defense strategy that focuses a lot more on the homeland and addresses overseas threats only through the lens of a new homeland-centric focus. That's the most likely case. The second possible thing he's going to do is fire a whole bunch of people. General Patton in World War II, when he came ashore, and saw the size of the general staff that was set up on the beach at Normandy and everything, I think the first thing he did was fire 2/3 of the people. And whether he actually fired them or just said he should is a little fuzzy in my brain. But the bottom line was, Patton believed that the military would run a whole lot better if you got rid of 2/3 of the general officers in the military. And the very fact that we have 800 general officers in the U.S. military, it kind of tells me that maybe that's the way Hegseth is thinking. Did you know that we had 800 generals? I didn't. I would have guessed we had 250 or so. And I think 250 would be a lot more reasonable. One of the worst things about the U.S. military over the last 10 years is that it has become extremely top-heavy. And when it becomes extremely top-heavy, and you have all these guys that are jockeying for their next promotion and trying to make sure that they don't get fired, what you see when that trickles down to the guy on the front lines, your average foot soldier, is just a tremendous amount of stupidity. I mean, it's hard to even measure how stupid it gets for the privates that are out there in the field when everything's being run by far too many generals. We saw that happen in Afghanistan. When the war started in Afghanistan, we saw a lot of kind of autonomy for the units that were there. First few trips I made to Afghanistan, it felt like big boy country. And if I needed to go to the Iranian border to do a report, I'd just go to the airfield at Kandahar or Kabul and go to the front desk and say, hey, you got anything going, out towards Iran? And they'd say, yeah, that helicopter over there is going to Herat. That's out there. So go see if they have any room. And I'd run out there on the tarmac and they're spinning up and go, hey, you got room for me? And they go, yeah. And I'd go, great. And I'd jump on and off we went. You just do what you had to do. As time went on in Afghanistan, Colonel North and I actually coined a term for this. We called it the greater flagpole theory, because what you noticed was that at the headquarters in Kabul or in Kandahar, you got more and more and more and more flagpoles going up. Lots of flags for all the general officers and all the different commands that were there. And as that happened, as that progressed, it got stupider and more difficult and more red tape to get anything done. I mean, it literally got to the point where I needed 3 different identification cards to go from the place where I was staying to the chow hall and get and eat chow. And if I wanted to go get on a helicopter somewhere, it was like Dulles Airport. You had to have a identification. You had to have a ticket. You had to have a boarding pass. You had to come 3 hours early. You had to check in. You had to all this stuff. You had to plan it all ahead. And it did not make it better or easier for the United States to accomplish its mission in Afghanistan. And indeed, I believe one of the reasons that we lost the war in Afghanistan was because of the tremendous amount of just plain old red tape. Other people might call it, some sort of manure. But the bottom line is, by adding so much red tape, we took a bunch of meat eaters, soldiers over there, and fed them a steady diet of cabbage for the entire time they were there, and it just didn't work out well. So Pete Hegseth might be noticing this. I'm sure he has known about it for some time, and might be saying it's time to pare back, and we need to cut 200, 300, 400, 600 generals. And one of the ways he's actually talked about this in the past, in the recent past, is by combining some of the combatant commands. So right now you have Northcom, CENTCOM, Southcom, EURCOM. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different commands, JSOC, etc. He might be about to combine a bunch of those into one and just have one command structure over all of them, because that's kind of the way that the world is going right now. The conflicts that are going on in the Middle East don't stay in the Middle East, and they're not. They are affected by what's going on in countries like China and Russia and other places as well. So it kind of makes sense to do something like that. So that's a possibility. Just streamlining the force, and I guess this is as good a time as any to go ahead and do it when we're staring down a government shutdown and we might need to purge some personnel anyway. Now, the media, the mainstream media has come out and said that, oh, we know what this is going to be. This is going to be a loyalty test. He's going to line them all up against a wall and say, you have to pledge allegiance to President Trump or you're gone. Now, the likelihood of that is somewhere between slim and none. Hegseth is, he's a man of integrity. He may be certainly giving, and he has been giving speeches to the effect of the old way of doing things is gone, but he's not saying you have to pledge allegiance to Donald Trump. What he's saying is you have to pledge allegiance to the flag, and the flag says all of us are created equal. And so you're not going to be promoting people based on their sexual orientation anymore, that was a thing. They were doing that. You're not going to be promoting people based on the color of their skin anymore. That was a thing. We're not going to have those. I mean, if you want to talk about a loyalty test, for the last 4 years under the Biden administration, they've had a loyalty test in the military. And that has been, you have to kiss the woke ring. You got to be all in on the woke agenda if you want to get promoted. And that's why they've got so many lesbian generals and transvestite, commanders and stuff like that. And Hegseth has been systematically chopping those off, just getting rid of them. And so this may be, more of that, but it's not going to be a, we're no longer playing the Pledge of Allegiance. We're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance to Donald Trump. That's not going to be a thing. Let me get a drink here. So you might hear stuff about that in the media, but that's bogus. I'm just telling you right now. President Trump's agenda is America. And so even if they say, you've got to get rid of all the woke garbage. That's not a loyalty test to Donald Trump. That's just restoring some sanity back to the U.S. military. Do you feel that way? Now, the next possibility is also very highly likely, and that is that we are addressing an urgent threat or crisis. There's something very urgent something big is about to happen. Obviously, Pete Hegseth has access to reams of intelligence that is not in the public domain. And they have had a big problem with leaks and hacks that have been happening of late, especially since Donald Trump took office. And so, a lot of people are saying, well, if he was just, putting out a memo about some threat or something we needed to do, we have secure messaging capability with all of our generals wherever they are in the world. They have their red phone or, their Microsoft Teams that's all secure or whatever, where they can do video conferencing and everything. So there's no real reason to get them all together in one place unless you're concerned about hacks or leaks. And if you're concerned about hacks or leaks, then it might be an important, and I just did a live about this the other day, this massive confiscation of illegal cell network cards and servers in New York. And they've been really tight-lipped about what that was all about. And they say that, well, the investigation's ongoing. Well, you can bet that Pete Hegseth's knowledge of that is far ahead of ours. And it could have been something much bigger than we thought. It could have been that they just, took out this ring of, cyber criminals or whatever that was about to pull off something unprecedented across the United States. I mean, I don't think I don't think it's 90% chance. It might only be a 10% chance, but even a 10% chance is very concerning, because if you take all this in context of the other threats that we've been made aware of, so like I reported on, the National Counterterrorism Center has put out a warning recently that Al-Qaeda is planning a major attack in the United States. Sarah, what's her name? Sarah something or other. I just posted about it over at chuckholton.com. So tell you what, let me run over there and I got to go find that thing again. Yeah, she's a former CIA targeter. This is coming from the Homeland Security Today, homelandsecuritytoday.us, hstoday.us. And Sarah Adams is her name. She's an ex-CIA targeter. And she's warning right now of an in-motion Al-Qaeda plot targeting the U.S. homeland. She says that Al-Qaeda has a three-pronged attack plan. They're planning aviation attacks using advanced hidden bombs, which that we've seen happening over in Europe. Actually, they uncovered a plot by Russia to do just that across Europe. And fortunately, nobody was killed. They did have one airplane that burned because of it, but hiding bombs in packages and making them untraceable or undetectable and then getting them on airplanes. So aviation attacks, then Mumbai-style massive multi-cell terror attacks where they attack multiple sites across one metropolitan area or multiple metropolitan areas. And they do that in a coordinated fashion so as to just cause absolute gridlock so that even the emergency services can't get there to respond. And if they do it across multiple jurisdictions, then it really could actually bring down the emergency response network. And that was one thing that we posited might actually be what they were planning with this cell phone server attack that the Secret Service just took down. I mean, thank God they found that, because I really believe that could have been the opening gambit for a much larger attack across the United States. And that fits perfectly with what Sarah Adams is talking about here. She said the third prong in Al-Qaeda's plans is mass casualty urban attacks, hitting soft targets like churches, hospitals, malls, and transit systems across the country, and doing it in a coordinated fashion nationwide so that it just absolutely paralyzes America. If they were to do that, let's say they had managed to recruit and train and infiltrate only 200 operatives over the last 4 years during the Biden administration when the southern border was wide open. We know that they were doing that. We know that they were infiltrating operatives into the United States that work for Iran, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and cartels and all that, a whole bunch of different ones. Russia too. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they managed to get 200 of them into the United States. They've been in the U.S. now for a year or 2 or 3 or 4, and they've been, looking like they have a normal life, working it out so that they can obtain firearms. That's not hard to do in the U.S., legally or illegally. Now, if they're not citizens, they can't get weapons legally, but there's still plenty of states across the union where you can buy guns out of the newspaper. I mean, in West Virginia, you can still do that. You don't need a background check. You don't need a permit. You can just, read in the newspaper that this guy's selling a gun, and you give him a call, and he meets you at McDonald's, and you swap guns with him. I mean, I've done it. It's not illegal in those states. So, they've had some time, these agents, to arm up, to plan, put together drones, that suicide drones build their own in the U.S. Maybe even smuggle explosives in. Who knows? And then we see a coordinated attack like Operation Spiderweb that Ukraine just did in Russia, or like the operation that the IDF did in Iran at the outset of the 12-day war, whereby these things are pre-positioned, staged, maybe even flown by AI and no human operator, and they just set them loose all at once. And all across the country, you just see a rain of fire, a rain of terror. You could, with only 200 operatives all doing that at once, even if they were only doing it the old-fashioned way with ramming, stabbing, shootings, at churches, hospitals, whatever, you could easily see the death toll rise into the multiple thousands, if not more. And this is why I've been harping on we need to be prepared for this. If you're in the United States, you need to be thinking about these things. You need to be thinking, how am I going to protect my family? You need to be thinking, would it be a good idea for us to go to that concert or that sporting event or whatever? And if you decide, okay, we're going to go, then you need to, when you're there, be thinking about, I want to sit close to an exit. I want to have a plan to communicate with my family if we get separated and we can't, and our cell phones don't work, stuff like that. Like, if you're the man of your house, you need to be thinking like this. This is being proactive. It's not being paranoid. Your family might think you're paranoid, but they will right up until the point where they need it, and then they'll be very glad that you were prepared. And it doesn't really cost that much to do. So perhaps Hegseth has some information about something like this that is potentially about to happen, and he's getting everybody together to say, hey, refocus. It's time to, be on the lookout. And this doesn't have to be just in the United States. This could actually be, and I've been believing that our adversaries are doing this for some time. All of our adversaries getting together, I don't know, maybe at a big parade in China that we just had recently, something like that, and having a meeting and saying, okay, China wants to take Taiwan, North Korea wants to take South Korea, Russia wants to take Ukraine, or even Moldova, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to, instead of all fighting these battles on our own, we're going to coordinate our attacks, and we're going to go big or go home all at once. And that's something that is becoming increasingly likely. Now, again, the likelihood is still, it's less than probably 25%, but it is becoming increasingly likely. It's that likelihood is growing. So it's not paranoid for the U.S. military to go. It appears to us that, for example, Russia has sent airborne instructors to China to train Chinese airborne troops in airborne operations so that China can airdrop troops on top of Taiwan. That's one thing that's been happening. In exchange, China has been sending some sort of military hardware to Russia. We don't exactly know what. What we do know is that those same cargo ships then are taking stolen Ukrainian cargo, like grain and things like that, and shipping them off to China, probably purchased from Russia at a big discount. So China is helping to support the Russian economy by buying these products at a discount, because Russia gets them for free because they just steal them from Ukraine. So we can see this sort of nexus forming, and we can see that China is supporting Russia's war against Ukraine. Russia is supporting China's designs on Taiwan. North Korea is getting a lot of help and support from Russia in exchange for soldiers and ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. So the U.S. military is, as we speak, responding to these threats. And you may not have heard much about it, but we've been putting on some pretty massive exercises all across the globe. And I've got a couple here to show you. One is called Operation Neptune Strike 2025, which is taking place across the Mediterranean and the North Baltic Seas, going farther north than any U.S. military operations have in decades. This is some footage from Operation Baltic Sea. So it's U.S. military aircraft that are refueling, and that's interesting to see right there, because that refueling aircraft is not your normal refueling aircraft. I'm not sure what exactly how that's working right there. That's something different that I've not seen before. It looks to me like a fighter jet that's carrying a bunch of extra fuel tanks so that it can refuel things. up in the sky. I don't know what, maybe one of you knows what that is, but I don't know what I just saw happening right there. But so this Operation Neptune Strike has more than 14 countries participating. It's in the seas, it's in the Mediterranean, it's over NATO territories, and it's included the firing of more than one Trident missile, nuclear missile, testing it, firing it off the coast of Florida into the Atlantic somewhere as a show of force. So as Russia has been saber rattling and saying, you know, hey, don't forget we've got nuclear weapons, the United States just fired a couple of nukes, nuke missiles without the nuclear warheads in a training exercise as a show of force back. It's like, hey, don't forget we've got nuclear weapons and ours actually work. So that's one thing we've seen. Now, the other thing we've seen is a nuclear submarine showing up near Taiwan off the coast of the Philippines. It's the USS Ohio. This is a training exercise. It was done on the Ohio by Marine Special Operations Forces, MARSOC. And so it's a very large, one of our biggest nuclear submarines, which has enough firepower, more firepower than many nations, just on that one submarine there. And that showed up off the coast of the Philippines in the last couple of days. It is evident that the United States is increasing its posture around China. In Japan, we have actually built new military bases and we're putting more people over there, more troops. In Guam, we're adding more troops. In the Philippines, we're reopening bases that had been closed for many years, naval bases over there. And I've actually been to and visited one of those bases that we're reopening at Subic Bay. And all of this is designed to counter China's designs on Taiwan, just as Operation Neptune Strike was meant to counter Russia's saber rattling and their threatening moves toward NATO. Okay. Now, in addition to the Russian drones that have, flown into Poland, Hungary, we've seen incursions over Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, over the Netherlands now, possibly over the UK. And now, just yesterday, we got word that German Intelsat satellites are being pursued by Russian satellites. This is something new. So take a look at this short report.
Just getting some breaking news from the German defense minister, this is Boris Pistorius, saying that 2 Russian surveillance satellites are currently pursuing 2 Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others. Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others, the German defense minister says, are being pursued by Russian surveillance satellites. The use of the word pursued, I can't give you any more insight on intelligence as to what exactly Boris Pistorius is saying here. But the Reuters news agency then going on to say that he's made the comments that we must no longer ignore the fundamental threat that Russia poses in space. This is the German defense minister, and obviously we've seen this huge uptick in the number of satellites being deployed into space, both from militaries and also from people like SpaceX under Elon Musk. And it is getting a very crowded field up above us. But interesting, this line, like I say, 2 Russian Luck-Olymp surveillance satellites currently pursuing 2 Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others. This is coming from the German defense minister, and obviously this is all set against that backdrop of Russian incursions into Estonian airspace, those 3 fighter jets that were there for 12 minutes, also the 9...
Okay, so you get the point there anyway. I don't want to let that go too long, but that's unprecedented. I don't even know what that means. If there's a Russian satellite chasing a German satellite? For what? Are they going to stop and board it? Are they going to shoot it out of the sky with space lasers? Are they going to dock to it and steal its intellectual property? I don't know. Are they going to, suicide themselves, right? Is that Russian satellite going to crash right into it? This is unprecedented. I've never heard of that happening before. So I have no idea. But it doesn't sound good. And if they're targeting those kinds of things, then yeah, this is an issue. And it's no wonder that Pete Hegseth is getting together a bunch of, generals. Now, one last thing that I'm going to just touch on for Hegseth in this meeting of 800 generals, and this is the one that makes the least sense, that is the most ridiculous, that the mainstream media is giving some of the most attention to. And that's the idea that Pete Hegseth is getting together all these generals because they're about to have a coup attempt to overthrow President Trump, or overthrow the U.S. government, the Senate and the Congress, something like that. These overreach rumors are patently ridiculous. And look, if you're listening to the sound of my voice and you believe that, you need to just go do some more reading. Okay, this is not going to happen. We're not going to have a coup in the United States of America. It's just not going to happen. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, we want to watch and see whether Hegseth delivers a sweeping defense doctrine or strategy change. So I'm just reiterating here. We want to see if he announces mass reshufflings or firings. We want to see how they frame what they're doing. Is it symbolic, strategic, or routine? Or is it an emergency? And they want to, see. We want to watch and see if any leaks emerge from this, and just see what the Joint Chiefs of Staff decides to do if they do have leaks. We want to get some reactions from Congress, and especially if the Congress kind of feels blindsided by whatever Pete Hegseth announces in this thing. And we want to just keep watching international events to see if things start to come to a head, because President Trump and the leaders of NATO have made clear that if Russia makes another incursion into NATO airspace, they will shoot down whatever flies into their airspace. Russia, Vladimir Putin himself, in an interview, said yesterday, if that happens, if NATO shoots down one of our aircraft, that is an act of war. I mean, Lavrov is over there blathering about that this is already a war, and that NATO helping Ukraine is an act of war. So whatever. I think you'd take that with a grain of salt. Think about it. Russia, for 3 years, has been unable to defeat a smaller country, and NATO represents 60% of the military might on planet Earth. They're not going to beat NATO. So I think what they're trying to do is trying to tit for tat with Ukraine. Ukraine is striking at the funding, the source of Russia's funding, their energy infrastructure. And so Russia wants to strike at the source of Ukraine's funding, but that's in NATO. That's like you'd have to be striking NATO to do that. So maybe Russia's going to roll the dice and say, we're already at war with NATO. We notice that most of the leaders of NATO countries are a bunch of weenies, and we see how they're very happy to send money to Ukraine, but they certainly don't want their own troops involved with anything. So it's not likely that the NATO forces are going to come against Russia with troops or, in a kinetic form. They'll probably just issue another strongly worded response. That was the criticism that President Trump gave the UN when he gave his speech a couple days ago, is that all you guys ever do is issue strongly worded responses. You never do anything. With President Trump saying that publicly, again, in the context of everything else that we're seeing, it makes me think maybe President Trump is coming around to the idea that we may actually have to use kinetic force to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine or over NATO countries or something like that. And we need to be prepared for any potential response from Russia. So that's all I got there. We're over an hour, but we got a bunch of questions. I want to get to them. Thank you, John Reppy, for the $9.99. Sherry World says, "Did you know that Kash Patel is being interrogated right now about the Epstein files?" And there, yes, I don't. Epstein files is a distraction, in my opinion. I'm not interested. Live Animal says, "Who will handle U.S. operations if all of them are called home?" Well, these guys can still run their operations from anywhere. They have the ability to do that, and there's a reason why you have executive officers in charge that can pick up and, take care of business. In reality, a general never has to be on site, right? I mean, why would a general need to be on site to tell people what to do? He can do that over the phone just as easily. And so it doesn't, the physical location of these generals is not that important in terms of U.S. readiness. But that's a good question, Live Animal. A lot of people have been asking that question, so thanks for asking it. Dobie Weiler says, "There are claims the drones sent into Poland were done by Ukraine as a false flag." That's false. We know where those drones came from. And, Ukraine doesn't have Russian drones. Those were Russian drones. They weren't, knockoffs. They were actual Russian drones. And Ukraine doesn't have any of those, so it couldn't have been. Charlene says, "How far are these countries from the United States?" 4,000 miles, give or take. Broski Bear says, "What's your take on Trump changing the name of the Department of Defense, Department of War?" I think that's great. Is World War III inevitable at this point? Broski, if you've been watching me for any amount of time, I believe we are already in World War III. World War III is not going to look like World War II. It's going to happen in stages. But when the history books are written, they're going to look back and they're going to say World War III started around February 2022, most likely. Okay? Bruce MacArthur says, "Is the Russian regime trying to provoke a full conflict with NATO?" I don't know about full-on conflict, but they're definitely trying to dissuade NATO from supporting Ukraine because, again, it's getting desperate in Russia right now. Russia, over the last year, has taken something like 0.2% of, or 0.25% of Ukrainian territory at the cost of hundreds of thousands of casualties. Russia's forces are not doing well on the battlefield right now. They can't use vehicles, tanks, or trucks or anything anywhere near the front lines because Ukraine has thrown up a wall of drones and they will just strike anything that moves. They are putting troops into the battlefield on bicycles and motorcycles and even donkeys now because they can't use vehicles. So Russia's not doing well on the battlefield right now. Carrie says, "God bless you, Chuck. Thank you very much." Califortune says, "But the Russians are so incapable they can't take 4 oblasts. So why would you worry they can attack the EU or USA?" Well, I think Russia's gamble might be that if we provoke NATO into a wider war, NATO will hoard its military equipment, stop giving it to Ukraine, and it'll start keeping it because they're going to be afraid that they're going to have to use it to fight Russia. And so therefore we can start making more progress in Ukraine than we were. And that's a kind of perverse logic, but it works with the Russian mindset. Russian mindset requires a war right now for its own survival. Like Russia, as it stands as a country right now, will not survive if the war stops. And they probably won't survive if the war continues. So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place right now. Mike Silva says, who poses the biggest threat to mainland U.S., China, or Russia, or North Korea? That's a good question. I think the only real threat to the mainland U.S. is from either these massive multi-cell terror attacks. That would mean Iran, maybe Russia assisting, but a kinetic attack on the U.S. mainland, like missiles coming across. Russia was probably the biggest threat, if you wanted to count it a threat, because they're closer than anybody else. Like I said, 2.5 miles across the Bering Strait. But the likelihood of them doing that is negligible. I don't think we have to worry about that. Khaled Fortune said, so are you saying Russia does have a reason to be concerned about NATO having troops in Ukraine? Yes, they do. Yeah, no, it's absolutely becoming more likely that there will be NATO troops in Ukraine at some point. Now, it might be unilaterally decided by, say, Poland. Poland might say, we're going to send troops into Ukraine. And Poland's a NATO country, but that doesn't mean that it's NATO troops in Ukraine. It's just Poland deciding to do it on its own. I think it's less likely that NATO itself decides to send a joint force into Ukraine anytime soon. They've talked about it in terms of peacekeepers, but that's way down the road at this point. Mama Marissa says, Russia seems to have a death wish. Would you put it past them to use nuclear arms against the West? I mean, there's a non-zero chance they would use nuclear arms, but it is still very, very unlikely because, as I keep saying, if Russia uses nukes, other countries will use nukes against Russia. So Russia might as well nuke itself. I mean, Russia knows that Russia as a country will cease to exist if they use nukes. That is the absolute last straw. So it's not impossible that Russia does it, but it's not likely. Just listen. Could it be related to Atlas? Related to? I don't know what you mean by that. Sorry. Thank you for the $9.99. AI Atlas? I don't know what you. I don't know what you mean by that. Sorry. Will their absence enemies might see both as opportunities to strike? Yeah, not like I said, it's not a problem to have generals go somewhere else for a meeting because they can do their job remotely. There's no general in the U.S. military that has to be in a certain location to do his job. Question, what did China say about Russia flying over NATO? China, as far as I know, has not said anything about it. Is North Korea in the UN? I don't think North Korea is a part of the United Nations. There are a few countries that are not. Are Sudan, Iraq, Afghanistan in the UN? Yes, they are. Did anyone walk out when they spoke? I don't recall anyone walking out when Sudan, Afghanistan, or Iraq spoke, but a lot of people walked out when Netanyahu spoke this morning, and we expected that. Jeff Hanna says, how do we even have 800 generals that are active in the military? That was my question. Holy cow, it's a lot. Lord Peanut says, if NATO goes to war, would Russia and its allies stay in the UN? Will they actually have diplomats in New York? How can the UN go on if the world's split into two camps? Well, you bring a valid question. I don't think that they would leave the UN for the same reason we wouldn't leave the UN, because they have veto power over the UN and they want to keep that. But it does kind of feel weird if we're at war, if these guys are at war with us or whatever, and we're coming to the UN and acting like, I don't know. But I mean, you've got Iran and Israel, both members of the UN, both giving speeches at each other. Ukraine and Russia are both members of the UN, always giving speeches at each other. You know, you suck. No, you suck. You know, it's that kind of thing. So it's not unheard of. Janet says, what measures will our government take to ensure the general safety at this meeting? Well, that's one of the reasons it's at Quantico, and you can bet it's going to be in a secure location. I mean, you know, They're not stupid. They're going to take measures to make sure that it's in a secure place. So why is it okay that Ukraine's plan was just to shut out Russia from its power that they built? Why is that a good idea? Well, it belongs to Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have an obligation to provide power to the Russian power grid. And if the Russians are attacking their country, which they've been doing since 2008, why would Ukraine reward them by giving them electricity? So it's not wrong for Ukraine to say, you know what, we want to join the European power grid because A, it's more stable, B, they're our friends, C, we want to move that direction anyway, and D, we don't want to give power to Russia. That's perfectly okay with me. There's nothing that they should be forced to. Christine Fraser says Trump is saying he won't allow Israel to annex the West Bank. Yeah, let's talk about that on the next live because I'm way over time here already. Califortune says right while Russia occupied the plant they were bombing it. Russia was bombing it. No, Russia occupied Zaporizhzhia, and there was a lot of fighting that went on around Zaporizhzhia. There were several instances of mortar rounds or artillery rounds landing in or near the Zaporizhzhia power plant. There was even some damage to the plant from those. It was never determined conclusively that Russia claimed that it was Ukraine bombing Zaporizhzhia. Ukraine claimed it was Russia. Now, the IAEA sided with Ukraine and said, no, that was Russia being irresponsible and firing those, missiles or rockets or artillery or whatever it was. But Russia was occupying Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and I certainly would not put it past Russia to drop a mortar round on the place. I mean, this is a large area, right? The power plant is like a couple hundred acres, right? So you're not talking about one building. And the mortar rounds landed on the roof of a adjacent administrative building or something. It didn't land on the plant itself where the nuclear reactors are. And I wouldn't put it past Russia to do that and then claim it was Ukraine. They have been known to do that a lot. I mean, that's kind of their modus operandi. Okay, why would Ukraine shut off electricity to that many people? Because they don't want to support Russia. And the Russian power grid is very fragile to begin with. Ukraine wanted to bolster its power grid and make it more resilient. And to do that, they wanted to join to the European power grid so that they could share power with Europe and not share power with Russia. Why would you expect Ukraine to share power with their adversary next door in Russia? So Check 53 is asking a question I already answered. Mama Marissa says, what is 3i Atlas? I don't know what that is either. Why is Klamath River Media says, why is Russia so aggressive lately? I think it's because Russia is getting more and more desperate. And so they feel like they have less to lose. And they're feeling like we've got to do something drastic to get NATO to stop giving Ukraine so much aid, or else we're really going to lose in Ukraine. And again, I think Russia sees the writing on the wall with these Flamingo missiles too, and saying, man, we're about to get hit really hard. And so we might as well go for broke. Elise asks, what's the emblem on my shirt? That's Black Rifle Coffee. That's just a coffee company. Nico says, then President Trump can sign the War Act if I understand it correctly. No, I don't think that changing it to the Department of War means he can sign the War Act. That I've heard that, but I don't think that's the point. I think that Hegseth is just trying to focus the American people on that the military is for fighting wars. It's not for just defense. It's for fighting wars. Lyle Smith says, what do you recommend as an alternative means of reliable communication? Depends on what distance you're talking about. There are mesh networks you might look into that would allow you to, let's say, text message your family if you're at a amusement park or a concert and you get separated and the cell networks are not working. There's a little device you can carry with you that will help you be able to at least text your family and send your location and that sort of thing. If you're close by, if you're far away, you might need some sort of satellite communications network like Starlink or Inmarsat or Global Star or something like that. From Chicago, what is Turkey still doing in NATO? Good question. William Woodward, perhaps Pete administers a pass-fail PT test. Failures mean firings. I would love to see that. Let's have a push-up contest. If you can't pass the PT test, you're out. Look, I agree. The United States has far too many general officers, and they need to cut back. So if that's all this is, and as I said at the beginning, that's one of the most likely reasons why they're having this meeting, is to refocus the U.S. military, change direction, and perhaps start cutting the fat. And I think they should totally do that. Okay, last but not least, do you think Putin has a health issue and he might just want to end it all for the whole world? I sure hope not. A lot of people have speculated about Putin's health, just like they've speculated about Trump's health. They've been doing that for years, and Putin's still going. So, no, I think Putin wants to stay in power, and he's seeing a kind of an increasingly narrow path to doing so, and so he's getting desperate. That's my thought. Okay, that's all I've got for today, folks. Thank you for all the folks who are watching. Again, if you haven't watched me before, I do these every day, 5-6 days a week, and if you want to get notified, you just subscribe to the channel here on YouTube or go over to chuckholton.com and you can sign up over there and become a subscriber or supporter and actually support some of the charitable work that we do around the world as I'm covering wars and disasters all over the place. So thank you very much for watching. God bless you, and we will see you next time, probably Monday. Okay? Take care.